My name is Joseph. I hear from your pastor that you're in the middle of a teaching series entitled Courageous. Is that true? So he asked me to come share a little bit of my story. Now, when I think of being courageous and having courageous faith, right? This morning's about courageous faith? Okay, good. I'm in the right place. When I think of a person who has courageous faith, I don't necessarily feel like I've always had courageous faith. But there's no doubt that faith has played a critical role in my life. Yeah, so again, my name is Joseph. You'll find my story in the Bible. And if you have your Bibles, you'll find it actually in the first book of the Bible. It's in Genesis. And it's the bulk of my story is actually found in Genesis chapter 37 to 50. So we're going to go through every chapter. So we'll be here about 6 hours, if that's okay. Just joking. Yeah, my story. It's quite the story. It's actually filled with a whole bunch of ups and downs. To be honest, I grew up in quite the dysfunctional family. Any of you grow up in a dysfunctional family? Well, nobody would admit to that, right? But let's face it, in many ways, all of us have had some component of dysfunction in our family. Would you agree with that? Because we're human and we make mistakes and things go awry at times in our families. Well, I got to tell you, my story was filled with some dysfunction. I'm the 11th son out of 12 to a man named Jacob. Jacob, my daddy, he's a pretty incredible guy. He kind of had this thing for me. He liked me. He favored me over the rest of my brothers, and I appreciated that. Maybe it was because I was the youngest, and I came to him during his later years in life, and I guess that made him grant me much more favor than my other brothers. In fact, one day, I'll never forget it, he came up to me and he gave me this amazing coat. And it had all these colors on it. It was awesome. And I wore it around all the time. But I got to be honest, it was because of my father's favoritism that my brothers, well, to be honest, they couldn't stand me. They hated me. And it threw all sorts of challenges for me in my life. I remember as a 17-year-old, I went out in the field. My dad says, hey, why don't you go out, Joseph, and see how your brothers are doing out there? So I did. And I remember I wore my jacket that day. I came to believe that as soon as my brothers saw that jacket, they just wanted to get their hands on me. But I remember that day I went out there, and you know what? My brothers, they were slackers. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and I caught them. So as a good 17-year-old, you know what I did? I went back home, and I told my dad. I said, Dad, your sons, they're not really doing what they're supposed to do, just so you know. And as I even say that now, I realized, boy, I probably shouldn't have done that. Nobody likes a tattletale. And of course, the boys come home, and Dad has a little conversation with them, and that didn't bode well for me at the end of the day. It didn't help them deal with their already bitterness and anger towards me. Now their young punk brother is telling on them. Sometimes we all make some bad decisions in life, don't we? Sometimes there's things that we reflect. I think, man, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have said that differently, or I guess that was one of my moments. Then I remember something quite remarkable happened to me. I remember going to bed just like any other night, and I had this amazing dream. But this dream, it was like so vivid. It was like real. Have you ever had a dream and you wake up in the morning, it's like, whoa, I feel like that was real. Did you ever feel that? Maybe in Canada you guys don't do that. You don't have those dreams, but I did. And so when you have those kind of vivid dreams, your first response is tell somebody. Like tell your family, hey, I had this dream. Well, so that's what I did. So I remember going to my dad and my brothers, my mom, and I said to them, this one dream was, there was all these 12 sheaves of grain. And they were all bowing towards me. And I kind of concluded to them that the sheaves of grain that were bowing were actually them, my brothers. They were bowing to me. Even just as I say that, I'm like, what was I thinking? Why would I ever say that to my brothers? Especially in lieu of already their hatred towards me. Probably not a good idea. But I was young. I mean, wasn't thinking all the time. And then my other dream was that there was the moon and the sun and the 11 stars that were all bowing to me. The sun and the moon represented my mom and dad, and the stars represented my brother. My whole family was bowing to me. So as I'm saying this, my dad goes, kid, are you nuts? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, you need to settle down. Although you're my favorite, I think you've just crossed the line. But they were so real, and I had to share them. I had to share them. But I got to tell you, there was this really dark moment in my life. I remember one day I walked out on the field, and my brothers were there. And this time they had a real deeper level of hatred toward me. Just looking at me, I could feel the hate off of them. You ever feel that way? Have you ever felt hated before? Have you ever felt like you're in the presence of somebody that just can't stand you? And what compounds it is that it was my very own family. I mean, that is deeply wounding, as I'm sure you can understand. That it's one thing if it's somebody who's away or apart from your family, but this was my very own family, and they hated me. They couldn't stand the sight of me. Only this day, they actually did something about their hatred. They attacked me, physically abused me, beat me, and then threw me in a well. A dried up well, no water. There I was at the bottom of this well, damp, cool, lonely, dirty, dark. It was one of the worst days of my life. I'm sitting there at the bottom of this well, and to make matters worse, I can hear my brothers up above having lunch together. They're kind of joking around and laughing, and I'm at the bottom of the well. Friends, it was heart-wrenching. It was my very own family that threw me down, left me to die there. I mean, sometimes, let's face it, our deepest wounds come from those that we least expect, don't they? I guess that's part of my story. The betrayal of a family. As they're eating lunch, I hear Judah, one of my brothers, he says, hey, look, there's merchants coming by. These folks buy slaves. And I hear one of them say, hey, you know what? Rather than leaving our brother there, why don't we sell him? At least we get some money for him. Oh, I got to tell you, that one hurt. That one really wounded me. Is that all I'm worth? Is a few shekels? And so they go and they take me out of this well. They grab me and they bring me to these merchants and they make a deal and sell me. So now I'm part of this merchant caravan en route to who knows where. And I know what's going to happen. They're going to bring me to a market, a slave market, where they line us up And then people come check us out and they buy us. So I got to be honest. At this point, I'm going, God, like, what's going to happen in my life? This is not what I envisioned. I thought about the dreams I had. I was like, this doesn't fit. You ever feel like that in life? When certain things that happen, it just wasn't in the game plan? It wasn't supposed to go this way. Our family wasn't supposed to look this way. My kids, it wasn't supposed to end this way. My marriage, you know what I mean. Well, I kind of felt like that. And then I get to the market and they line me up with all the other slaves. And sure enough, I get purchased. I get purchased to the household of a man named Potiphar. Now, even though I was struggling with some of the doubts and the pain that I had just experienced at the hands of my very own family, I had this amazing sense that God was with me. You ever experienced that? That though your circumstance and situation is so dark and so painful that you can't even put words to it, that when people ask you how you're doing, it's like you almost feel like vomiting. You're so distraught on the inside. Do you know what I mean? Yet amidst all those emotions and all those negative wounds in my life, I had this real sense that God was with me. I can't even really explain it to you, but I knew without a doubt that God was with me, and that somehow He would allow me to prosper. So I get to this guy's house, Potiphar. I mean, he's one of the rulers of the day. So I'm thinking, I wonder how I'm going to be treated here. But I figured, I didn't get myself into this situation. It wasn't because of my fault. It was because of somebody else's actions that I'm a slave. And so I just had to trust God. It was hard, trust me. I guess it's been said, His ways are higher than my ways. So I had to just have faith to believe that. So I tried to be the best slave I could be. I served Potiphar's household at the best of my ability. And I guess he started to notice my ability. And it seemed as though whatever I touched in his household, it provided success for him. And so he started to give me more and more responsibility to the point where I became his general manager. I was overseeing his entire household. Can you believe that? Only God could do that, right? I mean, just a few days ago, I was in a well, left to die. Next thing you know, I'm sold as a slave. Next thing you know, I'm in Potiphar's palace. And he's given me a huge responsibility. Wow, only God can do that. But I had one massive problem. Potiphar's wife. I got to be honest. She was gorgeous. She was. I mean, she was a beauty queen. And she had the best of the best clothes. Unfortunately, she wasn't faithful to her husband. And she would come to me and tempt me every single day to have sexual relations with me. I got to tell you, it was hard. As a single young man, it would have been easy to just make the wrong choice. But I remember one day, I just had enough. And I said to her, listen, your husband has given me everything to manage. He's trusted me with everything in his household except for you. How could I do such a wicked thing in the presence of God? And I ran as fast as I could because I knew that if I lingered in that environment, I would fall flat on my face. And so I ran. Unfortunately, as I was running away from her, she grabbed my jacket and she held it in her hand. You know what she did? She started yelling her head off. She called in all her servants and she began to lie. And she accused me of raping her. She totally set me up. And of course, Potiphar walks in. Who's he going to believe? He's not going to believe me. He's going to believe his wife. And within a moment, everything went wrong. Next thing you know, Potiphar throws me in prison. Next thing you know, I'm sitting in a cell block as a prisoner for something that I didn't even do. I got to tell you, there was some dark moments there. It kind of reminded me of my well experience. I thought to myself, God, I did what was right. I honored you. I chose what was righteous. I chose what was holy. I chose what was pleasing to you. And this is what I get? Imprisonment? You ever feel that way? You ever feel that sometimes life's unfair? Like that you've done it the right way, yet it seems like the evil prosper and the righteous don't? You ever feel that? It's like, God, this math, it doesn't add up. I felt like that. But there were moments that came and left quite quickly, to be honest. You see, I still had this sense that God was with me. Again, I can't really even put words to it. Even though there I was again in a prison cell, even though there didn't seem any way out of here, I still had this amazing sense that God was with me. And that it was going to be my job to just trust Him. Just to have faith in this awesome God. And so, I began to do my chores in prison at the best of my ability. Turns out the warden started to realize, boy, this prisoner, he's really committed at this. And he kept giving me more and more responsibility in the cell block to the point where he made me in charge of the whole prison cell block. Can you believe that? Come on. That's God. Only God does things like that. Only God makes a way where there seems to be no way. Even in the midst of some of our most darkest moments, only God can do that. Have you ever experienced that? In some of your most discouraging and dark moments, somehow God does something beautiful that only He can do. But I'm still in prison. And I remember this one day, being in charge of the prison block, of course. These 2 new inmates are brought in. Now, inmates would get brought in all the time because, you see, in our day, when a king would get fed up with some of his employees, he didn't just fire them, he sent them to prison. So on this day, the Pharaoh's baker, I don't know what he did wrong, maybe he overcooked the buns, I don't know, but he got sent into prison. And then his cupbearer got sent into prison as well. So these guys, you should have seen them. They showed up. They were so scared. They were shaking like leaves. So I try to calm them down. I'm in charge of the block, so I'm just like, guys, don't worry. It'll all be okay. What happened? And they told me their story. Getting to know them as days went on. And then one day, they both wake up. And they're like, man, we had these amazing dreams last night. Can somebody in here interpret them for us? So I'm listening to this, and all of a sudden, I really sensed the Lord giving me some discernment as to what their dreams meant. So I talked to the baker, and I'm like, you know what, bro? I hate to break it to you, but that dream is not going to end well for your life. In fact, you're going to die. Trust me, it wasn't easy to tell him that. Then I hear the cupbearer's dream, and I say to the cupbearer, you know what? Your story is much different than the baker. In fact, as the cupbearer, you're going to get reinstated in Pharaoh's household as his cupbearer. In just a few days, you'll see God will reinstate you into your position. As the days unfold, my interpretation was bang on. The baker was killed, and the cupbearer was given back his position in Pharaoh's temple. But I remember taking the cupbearer away. Before he left, I sat him down. I said, now you listen here, okay? Who interpreted your dream? And he's like, well, you did. And you saw your dream be fulfilled, correct? Yes, I owe you so much, bro. And I said, well, this is what I need you to do. You better make a way to get me out of jail. Don't forget about me. When you go back to Pharaoh, make sure you talk to him and make a way to get me out of here. I don't even deserve to be here. I've been wrongly accused. Don't forget me. And I remember his last words. No problem, bro. I won't forget you. How can I forget you? Don't worry. Have you ever had people tell you things and that's never follow through? Disappointment. Well, he goes in his separate way and he goes back to his position as cupbearer. Days, weeks, months, 4 years. 4 years go by. Nothing. 4 years. In prison. Wrongly accused. 4 years is a long time, isn't it? Have you ever gone through circumstances that just seem to linger in your life forever in eternity? Just seems like that, when are we going to turn the corner? When is this going to get better? When is there going to be an answer here? 4 years, day in, day out, in that prison. Yet, I had this sense that God was with me. And maybe that's what courageous faith looks like. Maybe sometimes courageous faith simply looks like endurance. Like enduring amidst our greatest and deepest dark moments. Maybe that's what courageous faith looks like. When the situation and the circumstances don't change, yet you keep trusting God. So I did that. I'm so grateful I did, because one day, it was like any other day, the warden walks in and says, "Hey, Joe, Pharaoh wants you." I'm like, "What? Pharaoh? What does he want from me? He needs you. He's calling for you." Well, I was absolutely shocked by this request. So his officials take me, they wash me up, they give me new clothes. Obviously, you don't just show up in the king's court just looking like a prisoner. So they wash me up, they bring me before him. And you know who the first person I saw was? The cupbearer, a rascal. And he's like, "Hey, remember me?" I'm like, "I remember you. You didn't remember me." 4 years, buddy. And he goes to say, Pharaoh has had these dreams, and he's called everybody he knows to try to interpret them, but nobody's been able to help him. And then all of a sudden, I remembered you. So I sat there, and Pharaoh told me his dream. And as I listened to this dream, the Lord was with me. And I reflect all praise and glory to him, because he's my king. And I began to interpret Pharaoh's dream for him. And I told him what this dream means is that this land that you are overseeing will go through much harvest and plenty for the next 7 years. There will be so much grain, so much harvest. It's going to be amazing. But then once those 7 years are over, there's going to be 7 years of famine. There will be no resources. And so, Pharaoh, this is what you got to do. In your 7 years of plenty, I want you to store as much of the grain as you can, so that when the 7 years of famine comes, You have enough not only for your people, but the surrounding regions will come to us to purchase grain amidst the famine. Pharaoh was amazed by my words. And he thought to himself, "Boy, this is a 14-year capital campaign." He thought, 14-year project, I need somebody to administer to this. So I'm just got my head down. He goes, "You know what? I think I'm going to put you in charge, Joseph. I mean, you're the one who interpreted my dream. You're the one who had the wisdom to tell me when nobody else around here knew what they were talking about. You were the only one. So, Joseph, I'm putting you in charge of this whole process." Friends, in a moment, my life changed. I went from being a prisoner to the second man in command. Are you hearing this? Only God can do that. Only God can do that. And all those moments in that well and those moments in that cell developed in me what faith really looked like. It wasn't easy. Here I am now, second in command of Pharaoh's kingdom. You might be thinking, didn't part of you want to get back to your brothers? Inflict revenge on them? Didn't part of you want to get back at Potiphar's wife and how she wrongly accused me? Didn't you, now that you were in a place of power, want to do all that? I got to be honest. Those thoughts kind of came across my mind. But I didn't want anything to do with that. You see, God had been doing a deep work in my life of healing, of restoration as to the deep pains that I received from my dysfunctional family. He'd been healing me. See, I had seen what hatred could do, and I didn't want anything to do with that in my life. I didn't want anything to do with that. But I got to be honest, when I started having my own children, things changed. Would that be true of you? When you start having a family, for those that have children, things change, don't they? You know, your perspective, your values, what's important, what isn't. Things get evaluated. I called my first son Manasseh. Now, you got to understand that in our day, when you named your children, you didn't pick names just because you liked the sound of them. They were cool. They were trendy. No, you called your name, you gave your children a name that meant something. So Manasseh was really important as to what it meant. Manasseh means forget. It means to forget. And the reason why I called my son Manasseh forget is because I wanted to remind myself and my entire family that it was God who enabled me to forget the deep wounds of my life. I wanted us to never forget that it was God who brought us through the pain, out the other side of it. Forget. Now, I'm not talking about amnesia, or else I wouldn't have been able to tell you what happened. The point to Manasseh and this principle of forgetting is that God carries us through to places of healing, and He enables us to forget those deep wounds in our heart. Friends, I have a feeling this morning that some of you are still carrying deep wounds in your heart from people you thought you can trust, and you haven't been able to shake it. You keep carrying it with you year after year after year. And you know what begins to happen? Hurting people hurt people. This vicious cycle of hatred and anger and bitterness just keeps getting worse and worse through entire lineages of families. Friend, take it from me, who experienced some really deep wounds from my very own family. God is more than able to help you forget. God is more than able to help you find healing and restoration in the deepest wounds of your life. Manasseh. Anybody need some Manasseh in their life? Some forgetfulness of the things that have haunted you for too long? You got to have faith to believe that God can heal you, can't you? And maybe that's where the courageous faith piece comes in. It takes a lot of courage and faith to believe, God, you can bring me to a place where it's the past and it's no longer going to hold me back. Because that's the kind of God you are. You heal us. Then my second son, I called him Ephraim. Any of you call your sons Ephraim? It's a great name. You know why? It means fruitful. Fruitful. Why did I call my second son Ephraim fruitful? Okay, this is why. Because it was God who allowed me to be fruitful in the land of suffering. It was God who enabled me to be fruitful in the land of my suffering. You know what? I am convinced that our faith grows the most on cloudy days. Our faith grows the most when we are left with a lot of challenges, when we're in the middle of a mess, when we're in the middle of dysfunction. That is an opportunity where God wants to make you fruitful in your land of suffering. You see, I think we've been wrongly taught sometimes. Sometimes when we think of courageous faith, we think if you pray hard enough, God will eliminate your problem. He'll just take it away. Then if that happens, you had enormous faith. But you know what I've learned? Sometimes God could do that, and he does it. But you know what? Sometimes he doesn't remove the suffering. Sometimes he just doesn't just fix it for us. Sometimes I have to endure it. And boy, does it take a lot of faith to endure. That's why I like this image that your tech staff put together. Just hands over a Bible. You'd think that if you're teaching a series on courageous faith, it would be something dynamic, somebody taking on the world. But no, it's just, sometimes it's just, God, I'm hanging on to you. God, you're all I have. You're my portion. And you're more than enough for me. So I will endure. I will choose to be fruitful. Ephraim, in the land of my suffering. I hope my story has inspired you. I hope it's helped you. I don't have it all together. I'm made out of the same stuff as you. But I want you to know, Manasseh, God can help you find healing in those deep wounds in your life. Don't allow them to hold you back from living a life for God. Ephraim, God has an ability to make us fruitful in the land of our suffering. Do you know why? Because God, in Genesis it says, God was with Joseph and made him prosper. It's all about God. He's the one. My life is his. Through the ups, through the downs. You know what I've